My name is Morel, and if you'd asked anyone who knew me back then, they would have told you I was the steady one, the dependable daughter, the quiet type who didn't ask for much and didn't make a fuss. I spent years thinking that being good meant staying small, keeping the peace, swallowing the hurt, making room for everyone but myself. But something happens when you realize the people who raised you never really saw you, and maybe never meant to. That's where my story begins, on the day I finally stopped waiting to be chosen. Stay with me through the end of this story. Then let me know in the comments. If you were in my place, would you have walked away too? Or would you have stayed just to keep the family together? I'd really like to hear what you think. It was the second Tuesday of May, the kind of Florida morning where the sky's too perfect and you start wondering when the storm will hit. The sun rose over Falcon Heights Aviation Center like it was trying too hard. The clouds were soft, the breeze was polite, and everything shimmered in a way that made you suspicious. I stood at the edge of the runway, clipboard in hand, watching the first student taxi out in a rented Cessna. On the outside, I probably looked calm, like someone who belonged here. On the inside, I was doing mental math so fast, it felt like trying to outrun a tailspin. $280 an hour. Every practice flight chipped away at the last of my savings. I'd scraped together enough to get through the first few months, tutoring high school algebra, cleaning rental cars, even working the closing shift at the Landing Cafe down near Clearwater Beach. But commercial certification was another beast entirely. And now, the money was thinning out, the loan offers were circling like vultures, and I was still trying to act like everything was fine. I didn't grow up around planes. Nobody in my family flew, not even as a hobby. But I saw my first one take off when I was 10, standing in the heat with my dad at the county air show, holding a sticky cup of lemonade and squinting into the sky. The plane wasn't anything fancy, just a private stunt jet, but the way it moved, I never forgot that. It didn't just lift, it escaped. I guess that's what I wanted too. Escape. Still, when I told my parents at 17 that I wanted to become a pilot, they laughed like I'd said I wanted to be a magician. My mom patted my arm and said something about how I'd be a great teacher instead. My dad looked over his glasses and muttered, "Dream smaller." I didn't fight them, I just worked around them. But today, I needed help. The kind I hated asking for. During my lunch break, I stepped outside and sat on the cement step behind the main hangar. It was quiet there, just the low hum of a distant engine and the soft thud of someone checking a tire pressure nearby. I pulled out my phone and called my father. He picked up after a few rings. "What now?" His voice had that tone, half annoyance, half suspicion, like I was always calling to borrow something. I hesitated, already regretting it. "I was just checking to see if you and Mom had a chance to talk about helping with this last part of my training. You said—" "I said we'd think about it, and we did. You're 32, Morel. If you're still playing pretend, that's your business." "It's not pretend. I've made it this far." "And that's far enough. You want to fly planes, go figure it out. We're not a bank, and you're not special. Stop fantasizing." He hung up. I stared at the screen for a while. The sun was warm on my face, but I felt cold. Not because of what he said. He'd said worse, and in colder tones. No, it was something else. The sharp edge of disappointment had dulled over the years, but this time it didn't feel dull. It felt hollow, like I was looking into a well that never had water to begin with. I went back inside, signed my name on the log sheet, and returned to class like nothing had happened. I smiled when I needed to, took notes like a machine, and told myself I'd figure it out. That's what I'd always done, patched the holes, kept the plane in the air. But something inside me had started rattling loose, and I wasn't sure I could hold it together much longer. That night, I lay in bed staring at the cracks in the ceiling, scrolling on my phone without really looking. My cousin Ray had posted a bunch of pictures: balloons, a cake, a crowd dressed in what looked like yacht casual. I almost scrolled past, but then I recognized the background. It was the Azure Pearl, my family's new boat. I had heard my mom mention it once in passing, like a footnote between grocery lists. Apparently, it was a reward for Elian getting into college. And now, here they were, throwing a full-blown birthday bash for him. In one of the photos, my mother was standing next to my brother, holding a wine glass and beaming like she'd just won an award. My father had his arm slung around Elian's shoulder, looking proud, relaxed. Everyone was clapping. In the foreground, a white envelope sat on the cake table. I zoomed in. From Mom and Dad. For your dreams. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just lay there, frozen, the ceiling fan groaning above me like it had something to say. I thought about all the birthdays I'd spent alone in the dorm, the silent holidays, the quick phone calls where no one really asked how I was. So, he gets dreams. I get invoices. The next morning, I showed up to work like always. Quiet, on time, invisible, if I could manage it. The simulation lab smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, and the air conditioner was making that low, rattling noise again, like something was coming loose inside the ceiling. I logged into the system and settled into the desk near the back, the one nobody else ever picked, because it was closest to the busted vending machine. The screen blinked on with a soft blue glow, and I pulled up the system's diagnostics out of habit, even though I wasn't scheduled to run a session for another hour. But my mind wasn't on the flight sim. It kept drifting back to that photo. The yacht, the cake, the envelope with my brother's name on it. From Mom and Dad. For your dreams. I didn't even know what stung more. The fact that they gave him money without question, or the fact that they gave it with celebration. When I asked for help, I got a list of reasons why I didn't deserve it. He asked and got a party. I tried to shake it off, told myself it didn't matter, that I was used to this, that it wasn't a surprise. But when the body remembers a wound, it doesn't really matter if the mind's already moved on. I found myself spiraling back to old moments I hadn't thought about in years, like the time I got accepted into the university's honors program and came home with my letter, only to find my mom too busy sewing a new tux for Elian's winter recital. She didn't even look up when I said it out loud, just told me dinner was in the microwave, or the time I had to get my appendix out sophomore year and no one visited. Not even a call. It was my roommate Tasha who brought me clean socks and sat with me when I couldn't sleep because of the pain meds. My parents told me later they didn't want to make a big fuss. When Elian broke his wrist playing basketball, they both slept at the hospital for 2 nights. My dad even brought his guitar to play in the waiting room. "You're the strong one," they always said. "You don't need as much." What they meant was, "You make do." The door opened behind me with a soft squeak, and I didn't even turn until I heard the thud of a coffee cup against the desk. Jonah Reyes stood there, in his usual faded jacket, holding a second cup in his left hand, the one he placed next to my keyboard without a word. "Didn't think you'd be in this early," I said, not looking at him. "I'm always here early. You just don't notice." He pulled a chair over and sat beside me. We weren't close. We hadn't shared anything more than a few exchanged notes on faulty sim software and the occasional nod in the break room. But there was something about him that felt solid, like a radio tower in the fog. You might not see it, but you knew it was there, anchored. I nodded toward the coffee. "Thanks," he shrugged. "You showed up? That's something." That was it. Just that. No prying questions. No, "You okay?" Pity. Just a cup of coffee and a sentence that landed deeper than he could have known. I took a slow sip, letting the bitter heat ground me. Outside, the morning sun had started cutting across the windows, casting lines of light over the console. Jonah glanced at my screen, watching the interface boot into the default training module. "You still tweak these setups yourself?" he asked. "Yeah, just habit now." He leaned in a little, eyes scanning the custom parameters I'd built for the takeoff sequence. He let out a low whistle. "You'd make a better instructor than half the people here," he said casually. "Probably more." I didn't respond. I couldn't, really. My throat closed up in that strange way it does when someone says something kind and you don't know what to do with it. Not because you don't believe them, but because no one's ever said it before. I'd heard plenty of things growing up: that I was responsible, that I was quiet, that I was low maintenance, but not good, not better than most. That kind of thing, it sticks, not just to your heart, but to the parts of you that thought they were invisible. Jonah stood, stretched his back with a small groan. Anyway, I'll be in Bay 3 if they need you to fill in. I nodded, still staring at the screen. He was halfway out the door before I found my voice. Hey, Jonah. He looked over. Thanks for the coffee. He smiled, then left without saying anything else. I sat there a while longer, letting the moment settle into me, not trying to analyze it, just letting it be real. It shouldn't shake me like this, just to hear I'm good at something. But maybe it's because no one ever said it before. I waited 2 days before calling again. I told myself it was for my dignity, that I didn't want to sound desperate. But the truth was, I was waiting for something to change. Maybe a second thought. Maybe a sliver of recognition. Maybe just the sound of someone remembering I was worth betting on. The second call didn't go better than the first. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was sitting in the stairwell behind the simulator lab. The concrete steps were warm under me, and the metal railing dug into my back. I held my phone like it might bite. When my father answered, I almost hung up out of reflex. Yeah? He said. I just wanted to try again, I began. My voice sounded small, like it didn't belong to someone who'd spent years fixing problems for herself. About the flight hours, I'm still short, and I've done everything I can. Look, he cut in, if your brother needed something, I'd sell my damn truck. But you're fine. You always have been. You don't need help. You know how to make do. That sentence hit harder than the first rejection. I wasn't even asking for money anymore. What I wanted was something I couldn't say out loud. I wanted him to believe in me, to believe with me, just once. But all I got was silence on the other end, and then the soft click of him hanging up again. I sat there for a while after that, not crying, not angry, just numb. That's the thing about being the one who makes do. People stop checking if you're okay. They assume you'll bounce back because you always have. They stop asking what you need and start expecting you to carry more. My memories started surfacing like bruises, not the big ones, but the quiet, forgettable kinds that stick. When I got a full state scholarship to college, I printed the letter and taped it to the fridge. My mom took it down the next day to make room for a flyer about Elian's piano recital. No one ever said congratulations. I just overheard my dad muttering to her later that a girl doesn't need all that school nonsense anyway. Elian once got a B+ in chemistry, and they took him out for steak. I sat through my final class that day, barely listening. The numbers on the whiteboard blurred with the thud of my heart. It was like my body knew something before my brain did. After class, I didn't even go back to my dorm. I went straight to the office. The admin assistant looked up when I walked in. You okay? She asked. I nodded. I need to withdraw from the commercial flight portion of the program. She blinked. You sure? You've already... I'm sure. She handed me a form. My hand didn't shake when I signed it, but it felt like something inside me cracked when I slid it back across the counter. Word spread fast. A classmate named Priya tried to talk me out of it in the hallway. One of my instructors, Mr. Colson, called me into his office and said I could take a leave instead, maybe just pause for a semester. You've worked too hard, he said gently. You're too close. But I wasn't close. I was exhausted. Not just from flying, from hoping. I packed up my things from the dorm that evening. The light in my room had that dusky, too quiet glow, the kind that makes you feel like time is folding in on itself. I moved slowly, folding everything like I might have to unfold it again someday. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. I opened the top shelf of my closet and pulled out the last box. It was labeled flight stuff. scrawled in Sharpie. Manuals, maps, gear. At the bottom was a small model airplane, sleek, silver, wings stretched. I remembered it instantly. It wasn't mine. It had been a gift for Elian from Dad. He'd left it on the table that night when I turned 29, the same night they forgot to call me. I remember walking in after a shift at the diner and seeing the little box, thinking for a second it might be for me. It wasn't. It never had been. I wrapped it in an old t-shirt and dropped it into the box with the rest. I closed the lid, taped it shut, and whispered goodbye. Not to the dream, but to the waiting. I didn't fly again after I left the program. Not right away. What I did instead was take a job nobody else wanted. Ground maintenance at Clearwater Executive Airstrip, a place that smelled like jet fuel, salt air, and sweat. It was a quiet, no-frills strip on the edge of town, mostly used by private pilots and training schools that couldn't afford better. There was no glory there, just oil stains, broken tow bars, and people who didn't ask many questions. I started on a Monday morning. They handed me a safety vest, a tool pouch, and a laminated checklist for pre-flight inspections that had coffee stains and someone's initials scratched into the corner. I spent the first 2 weeks crawling under wings, wiping bugs off windshields, and replacing batteries the size of microwave ovens. My hands were constantly scraped up, my back ached from crouching too long, and the soles of my boots turned black by day 3. But I didn't complain. It was honest. It was solid. And for once, it didn't ask me to prove anything except that I could work. Still, people noticed me. Not in the kind of way I wanted. I heard the whispers near the hangar. Some of them didn't even bother to lower their voices. "You're the dropout, right?" a guy named Travis asked me one afternoon, wiping grease on his jeans. "Could have been flying, now you're wiping grease." I didn't answer, just looked him in the eye and held his stare for a second longer than comfort allowed. Then I went back to checking the pressure gauge like I hadn't heard a thing. It didn't sting the way I expected it to. Maybe because I knew it was true, not the way he meant it, but in a different sense. I had chosen to step away. Not from flying exactly, but from the version of flying that came with strings I couldn't untangle anymore. From the dream that had become more about pleasing people who never really saw me. One afternoon, I was doing a systems check on an old SIM module that belonged to a nearby training facility. They'd brought it in for a software update. It looked like it hadn't been touched in a year. The lights flickered. The controls were slightly loose. Still, I moved around the panel like I'd never left. My hands remembered. My eyes knew where everything should be. That quiet, technical rhythm settled back into my body like muscle memory. "Still good with her hands," a voice said behind me. I turned. Jonah Reyes was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. Same tired jacket. Same unreadable expression. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said. "Didn't expect to see you covered in battery acid," he replied, nodding at the smudge across my sleeve. I laughed before I could stop myself. The first real laugh in weeks. It came out awkward, rusty. He walked in and examined the sim, then looked at me with that same steady gaze. "You ever considered teaching sim?" I blinked. "You mean like running the modules?" I mean teaching. We're short-staffed. You know the systems inside out. I remember your setups from Falcon Heights. You were better than most of the instructors, and half of them had no clue what they were doing." I didn't know what to say, not because I didn't believe him, but because I'd never imagined someone would say it. He pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to me. "We've got a training class starting next week. Come in, observe. Maybe run a few sessions. Just see how it feels." He didn't pitch it like a favor, didn't smile like he was doing me a kindness. He just offered it like it was natural, like I belonged there. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself consider the possibility that maybe I did. A few days later, I stepped into the simulator room at Summit Sky Institute. Not as a student, not as a guest, but as a trainer. The lighting was soft and low, humming with that familiar electronic warmth. The control panels were cleaner, sleeker than what I'd worked with at Falcon Heights. Still, it felt like home. My hands hovered over the switches, and I felt something settle in me. Not excitement exactly, but alignment. The class was quiet, 3 students waiting in the corner, with notebooks and headsets. I introduced myself simply. I didn't oversell, didn't apologize. I just started. By the time I walked out of that room an hour later, I wasn't thinking about my father, or Elian, or the envelope on the yacht. I was thinking about altitude settings, wind shear adjustments, and how one of the students had looked at me like I knew something worth knowing. I never imagined the sky would find me in a basement room, but here I was, flying again, without ever leaving the ground. It was almost 9 at night when I walked out of the simulation lab at Summit Sky. The building had thinned out. Most instructors were gone, lights dimmed, just the quiet hum of cooling systems and the occasional buzz of a vending machine compressor still hanging in the air. My back ached from standing too long. My voice was hoarse from coaching students through emergency procedures. I was tired in the good way, the kind of tired that came from doing something that mattered. Then my phone lit up. 7 missed calls, all from Mom. There was also a single message. Please call home. It's urgent. I stood in the staff kitchen for a moment, phone in my hand, debating whether to call or ignore it. There had been a time when I would have jumped at that kind of message, already imagining hospitals, accidents, worst-case scenarios. But tonight, I didn't panic. I just stared at the screen with a familiar hollowness. Still, something in me said, "Pick up." So I did. She answered on the first ring. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice clipped with anxiety. "We've been trying to reach you all day." I didn't respond right away, just waited. Then a second voice, lower, slower, came on the line. My father. "Morel," he said, and it startled me how soft he sounded. "Can you come home for a few days?" It was the first time he'd asked me to come home since I left. My stomach twisted, not from hope, but from caution. "What's going on?" I asked. A pause. Then, "The Azure Pearl. We're about to lose it. The bank's moving to seize the title. We're behind on payments. If we can transfer the title to you temporarily, it buys us time. You've got a clean record. Good credit. It's just paperwork." I closed my eyes, listening to the static between his words. "No, how are you? No, we're sorry. No, we miss you. Just, we need you. Do this for us." It was like being 10 again, standing in the kitchen with a single slice of cake, watching my brother blow out candles on a 2-layer chocolate masterpiece, while my mother whispered, "Let him have the bigger piece. You're older, you understand." I remembered that moment like a scar that never faded. Only now, I wasn't 10 anymore. "Why me?" I asked quietly. Another pause. Then my mother's voice came through, exasperated, like I'd missed something obvious. "Elian's still figuring things out. He doesn't have the stability. You've always been the one who could carry weight. You're not impulsive. You're dependable," I said for her. "The one who doesn't ask for anything." "Yes," she replied, as if that were a compliment. I walked down the hallway and sat on the bench outside the front doors. The air was humid, sticky with the beginnings of Florida summer. A moth fluttered near the overhead light, trapped in a frantic loop. "So you want me to put my name on the boat," I said slowly. "To help you avoid seizure. You'll transfer it back later." "That's right," Dad said. "It's just a formality. We can't lose this boat, Morel. Your mother's already sick over it." Sick over a yacht. I pressed the heel of my palm against my forehead. Not from anger, just disbelief. It wasn't that they were asking. It was that they thought I'd say yes, without hesitation, without question. And I realized something in that moment, something cold and clear and sharp as glass. I was never the child in that family. I was the insurance policy. They never asked what I needed. They only called when something had to be covered. something saved, something shielded. I'm not doing it, I said. My father's voice dropped just a notch. This is your family, Morel. We've done so much for you. You did what was convenient, I cut in. And when it stopped being easy, you stopped showing up. Except now that your boat's in trouble. There was silence. Not angry silence, just stunned, like they hadn't seen this version of me before. I have to go, I said, already standing. I've got a morning class. And before they could say anything else, I ended the call. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty parking lot, the flickering security light, the way the wind barely moved the flag above the building. Everything was quiet, still. But inside me, something had shifted, something final. I agreed to meet them, not because I had doubts, not because some soft part of me was holding out hope, but because there's something in us, even after years of being overlooked, that still wants to believe maybe this time they'll see you differently. Maybe this time they'll choose you. The cafe was near the airstrip. Nothing fancy, cracked tiles, faded menus, old men in flight jackets talking about tailwinds. The kind of place where the coffee tastes like burnt hope and the eggs come rubbery no matter how you order them. But they showed up like it was an occasion. My father wore a navy blazer I hadn't seen since Elian's high school awards banquet. My mother had on a pearl necklace and one of those soft pastel sweaters that made her look like someone's idea of a senator's wife. They stood when I walked in, all smiles and overcompensated warmth, as if we were just a family reuniting after a long vacation. I didn't come alone. Jonah had picked me up without a word, driving the 20 minutes in silence, except for the low hum of the fan. When I asked if he'd mind staying close, he didn't hesitate. He sat 2 tables away from me in the cafe, ball cap low, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he never drank. It helped, not in a dramatic, knight in shining armor way, just in the steadying sense that someone real was near, and I wasn't walking into this alone. I slid into the booth. My parents followed suit. "We're glad you came," my father started. His tone was rehearsed, even deliberate. "We thought it'd be good to talk face to face. You know, no tension." "No grudges," my mother added, smiling like she thought that might smooth things over. "What's past is past. What matters now is helping family, coming together." They spoke like people offering me a chance to redeem myself. I stayed quiet, let the silence do the talking. They didn't seem to notice. "We brought the paperwork," my dad said, patting a thick envelope between them. "It's simple, really, just temporary. You sign the title for the boat. We clean things up with the bank. After a few months, we shift it back. No risk to you." I wrapped both hands around the mug of coffee in front of me. It had long gone cold. Still, I held it like it anchored me to something. I stared at them. These 2 people who had never asked me what I needed, only what I could provide. I took a breath. "If Elian were here instead of me," I said, voice low, "would you be asking him to do this?" That finally shut them up. Mom looked at Dad. Dad cleared his throat. "Elian's still figuring things out," he said. "He's young. This kind of thing, it's complicated. You, on the other hand, you've got your life in order. A job, a stable name. This makes sense." I nodded once, slowly. "Because I'm the responsible one." "Exactly," my mother said, relieved I understood. I looked down at the envelope, then up at them. My voice stayed steady. "I'm not signing anything." My father stiffened. "Morel, let's not make this dramatic. We're asking you to help. Your family." "No," I said. "You're not asking. You're expecting, like you always have." Mom leaned forward, voice sharp. "Don't forget who supported you." I gave a bitter laugh. "When?" "When I got into college and you didn't call for 3 days? When I was in the hospital and no one showed up? But Elian got a stomach bug and you slept next to his bed for 2 nights?" She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies. I don't even want them. I just needed to see it with my own eyes, that nothing's changed. You still only come to me when you need something. My father picked up the envelope again, sliding it closer to me like a peace offering. You'll regret this, Morel. When this family breaks apart, and you're the one who let it happen. I stood. I'm not the one who let it fall apart, I said. I'm just the only one who stopped pretending it was still standing. I turned and started walking. The old linoleum squeaked beneath my boots. Then, from behind me, her voice cut through the cafe like a knife. You'll regret this, Morel. You'll regret letting your family collapse. I paused, just for a breath. Not because it hurt, but because that voice, that tone, I'd grown up wrapped in it. I knew it like I knew the rhythm of my own heartbeat. And still, I didn't turn around. I said, the family collapsed a long time ago. I was just the last one still holding the pieces. And I left. Outside, the sky had turned a dusty gold. Jonah was already at the car, leaning against the passenger door, waiting. He didn't ask what happened, just opened the door and let me in. We drove off, windows half down, the wind brushing through like something had finally opened up. And somewhere inside, something finally let go. The whispers didn't take long to find me. Not from my parents. They had gone quiet after the cafe. But from everyone else. The extended family orbit. The cousins who only called at Christmas. The aunts who sent birthday texts at the wrong time of year. People who hadn't asked how I was doing in a decade suddenly had opinions. It started online, like it always does now. A second cousin, Diane, I think, posted something vague but pointed. No names. Just implication. Some children forget who raised them. Parents give up everything, and when they finally ask for help, they're turned away. So heartbreaking. It had 6 likes. 2 sad face reacts. Someone commented, ungrateful generation. Another just wrote, shameful. I stared at it for a while. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. Just exhausted. Years ago, I would have crafted a careful comment. I would have justified, explained, listed all the birthdays missed, all the phone calls never returned, all the times I'd swallowed silence for the sake of peace. I would have wanted people to know the whole story, not just the headline version. But now, I just turned the phone over and went to bed. That kind of peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from knowing you've stopped needing to be. The next morning, I arrived at the sim lab early, half dreading the empty hallway. But Jonah was already there, leaning against my desk like he belonged there, holding a small paper bag and a coffee cup. He didn't say much, just handed me the bag. Inside was a model airplane, silver, lightweight, slightly scuffed on the left wing. It looked like it had been hand-painted, probably bought from a vendor at one of those traveling aviation expos. For your shelf, he said quietly. Not theirs. That shouldn't have hit me the way it did. But I remembered, clear as day, the way Elian had a whole shelf of planes when we were kids. Different colors, different models. He got them for birthdays, good grades, sometimes for no reason at all. I'd once circled a similar plane in a catalog, left it on the kitchen counter. Nothing ever came of it. I ran my fingers over the wing. It wasn't about the object. It was about being seen. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Jonah didn't press anything, just walked back to his station. That was the thing with him. He never needed to be the center of the story, but he always showed up when it mattered. Later that afternoon, I got the email. Subject line, transfer declined, the bank had processed a cancellation. The title change for the Azure Pearl had been officially withdrawn. No explanation, no follow-up. Just confirmation that I was no longer in the conversation. I sat still for a long moment, staring at the screen, letting the realization sink in. They'd found another way, or maybe they'd given up. Either way, it no longer concerned me. And this time, I didn't feel guilt, not even a flicker. That night, I stayed late to prepare for my first full-length sim class. My name was listed on the roster as lead instructor. No assistant, no observer, just me. 12 students. I set up the systems, ran diagnostics, laid out the training folders just the way I liked them. No frills, just clear, solid instruction. When they arrived, there was a buzz of nervous chatter. Most were young, fresh out of undergrad. One had a military patch sewn onto his bag. Another looked like she was barely 21 and still wore braces. I welcomed them, started walking through procedures. Altitude calibration, throttle feedback, troubleshooting. It felt easy in my mouth, like I was speaking a language I hadn't forgotten. Halfway through, one of the students raised his hand. Shy, red hair, knuckles tight around his pen. "You've flown before, right?" he asked. "Like real planes?" I smiled. "Sort of," I said. "Long enough to know the ground matters just as much as the sky." That earned a small ripple of laughter. It felt good, not to be liked, necessarily, but to belong. After they left, I sat for a while in the quiet. The monitors still hummed around me. The room was still warm from 12 bodies and focused minds. I pulled out a sticky note from my bag, wrote 5 words in blue ink. "Dreams don't need permission." I stuck it to the edge of my monitor. Not for show, not for motivation, just as a quiet marker, a reminder that I didn't need anyone else to tell me what I was allowed to reach for. Outside, the sun was folding itself behind a row of palm trees, low and soft. The lot was mostly empty. The sky was just beginning to deepen into that electric dusk Florida does so well. No more pleading, no more waiting. Just sky, even when the feet stay on the ground. A few weeks passed, quietly, without event. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like waiting, just being. I was sitting in the instructor break room at Summit Sky, the same faded recliners, the same humming fridge that always made the ceiling tiles rattle when it kicked on. The table in front of me was scattered with student worksheets, simulator feedback forms, engine troubleshooting drills, and scribbled diagrams of takeoff angles that made sense only if you'd stared at them long enough to understand the rhythm behind the math. They weren't just papers anymore. They were proof of a life I had built, not inherited, not begged for. Built. My inbox chimed. The subject line read, "Final update, Azure Pearl Holdings." It was from a law firm in Sarasota, a name I recognized, my parents' business attorney. The email was brief. The yacht had been sold. The lien wasn't fully cleared, and a separate audit was now pending. My name had been formally removed from all inquiries. There would be no further communication, no apology, no explanation, just resolution. I stared at the screen a moment longer than I needed to. Not because it hurt, it didn't. Not even because it brought closure. It didn't quite do that either. It just ended something. I deleted the email, closed the laptop, let the stillness linger. They would survive. Or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. That Saturday, Jonah and I met at Juno's place, the same small cafe tucked behind the hangars. Still smelled like burnt toast and overbrewed coffee. He waved me over without standing, pushing a chipped mug across the table toward me, like we'd done this 100 times. He didn't ask how I was. He never did. Instead, he nodded toward the window, where the sky over Tampa had started to shift into its evening blues. "You ever think about calling them?" he asked. I didn't pretend not to know who he meant. I shook my head. They didn't lose me now. They lost me years ago. I just didn't know it yet. Jonah nodded, like he'd already guessed the answer. He leaned back in his chair and stared out the window for a while before speaking again. "I once flew a campaign run out of a field base in Nevada," he said. 3 storms back to back, crew down 2 engineers. Half our maps were out of date. We stayed as long as we could. But one morning, I walked out to the tarmac, looked around, and said, 'We leave now or we don't leave at all.'" I raised an eyebrow. "Did they listen?" He smiled faintly. "Just enough of us did. The rest got grounded for good." We didn't talk more about it. We didn't need to. Some places can't be saved, and they're not worth dying for. That following Sunday, I opened the sim lab early and set up for a special training class. This one just for the female cadets. Something I'd requested, designed, planned entirely myself. No fanfare. Just a room full of first-time flyers, all of them young and uncertain and quietly fierce in ways they hadn't figured out yet. One of them lingered outside the door before stepping in. She looked maybe 19, her ponytail too tight, her jaw set like she was bracing for judgment. She approached me before the session began. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked. Her voice was soft but steady. "That you don't belong here?" I smiled. "All the time," I said. "But I fly anyway." And I meant it. When the class ended, the room emptied slowly, buzzing with the kind of focused excitement I remembered from my early days. The kind that reminded you of who you were, even when nothing else did. I gathered my notes, turned off the main switch, and stepped out into the open air behind the simulator building. The sky was turning the soft copper gold of a Florida sunset, brushed with pink at the edges, the kind of sky you could breathe in and still feel full. In my jacket pocket, I found a folded piece of paper. Jonah had tucked it there without saying anything. I opened it. In his neat, all-caps handwriting were just 10 words. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no." I read it twice, tucked it back in, stood there for a minute longer, letting the sky hold me. I didn't burn bridges. I just walked so far, the smoke never reached me. Sometimes walking away isn't about giving up. It's about finally choosing yourself. Not out of anger, not to prove anything. Just because you're tired of standing in places that never made space for you. Maybe you've been there too, holding on longer than you should, hoping someone might see your worth without needing a crisis to remind them. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll stay with me too, for the next one. We've got more to say. And maybe more to heal.